Hi everyone, I'm Wong, and today I'll present my research project, Tariffs and Their Unexpected Consequences, the impact of US-China trade relations on the US and third-party countries. Here's the roadmap. First, I'll give context on the US-China trade war. Next, I'll explain my data and methods. Then, I'll walk through the key findings, the reporting gap, and trade redirection. Finally, I'll connect these findings to their broader impacts before wrapping up with conclusions. In 2018, President Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese imports worth about $380 billion, effectively an $80 billion tax. These were designed to protect US producers against alleged Chinese dumping and reduce the trade deficit. But in practice, tariffs often have wider ripple effects. Fast forward to 2024, Trump, now a candidate again, has pledged even harsher tariffs. So the question is, what lessons can we learn from the first trade war? And how might markets react if tariffs return? I hypothesized that the effects of the 2018 tariffs were not fully realized, due to the redirection of trade through third-party countries. Therefore, the thesis for this project was Trump's 2018 tariffs didn't just reduce direct trade between US and China, they rerouted trade flows through third-party countries, temporarily cushioning US consumers, but ultimately detrimenting the effectiveness of the policy and distorting global markets. To study this, I compared three main data sources, which gave me the trade flows by HS code: US import data from the US ITC, Chinese export data from the General Admissions Council of the People's Republic of China, and more detailed Chinese export data from UN Comtrade, as the GAC PRC did not label exports by HS code. Rather, they aggregated all exports. Using these, I could cross-check reporting and track how goods move through China, from China through third-party countries, and finally to the US. Now, you might be asking, what is a HS code? Every product has a HS code. For example, frozen pork is coded as 0203-1210, but as a subset of meat swine, fresh, chilled, or frozen, which is 0203, and a subset of hams, shoulders, and cuts thereof with bone-in, which is 12. By attaining a tagging of all tariff goods, I could separate which flows were directly targeted by tariffs and which weren't. That gave me a clean way to test how tariffs reshaped trade patterns. My methodology was quantitative and relied on trade data from three sources. The raw data came in different levels of detail, so I standardized it at a HS6 code level. That's the most detailed resolution available from UN Comtrade, and it allowed me to directly compare goods across datasets. Next, I used a tagging system from the US ITC to classify which HS codes had been tariffed and which were not. This let me split the data into tariffed and non-tariff goods. With this tagging in place, I could then track how tariffed versus non-tariff goods flowed between China, the US, and third-party countries. Finally, I compared trade value reporting by US firms versus Chinese firms. Any mismatches in the reporting gap, served as evidence that transshipment or trade diversion might be taking place. Here's the first finding. As you can observe from this plot, the difference in trade valuation is relatively constant till 2018, where we notice a sharp convergence of trade valuations and subsequently a complete reversal of the reporting gap. These tariffs resulted in extra costs for US importers. High costs raise the incentive for US importers to underreport the value of their imports. This is compounded by the possible trade diversion, which negatively misrepresents the value of Chinese imports from the US perspective. To gain a better insight into the relationship between tariffs and the change in reporting gap, I conducted a more in-depth study comparing goods that were tariffed with those that were not. From the figure, a large shift in the reporting gap for tariff goods can be observed. Conversely, for the non-tariff goods, only a slight shift can be seen. This is relatively insignificant when compared to the shift in reporting gap for tariff goods, which is greater by a factor of 24. This emphasizes the direct relationship between the introduction of tariffs and a change in the reporting gap, validating our claim that trade redirection and/or trade fraud are occurring on a larger scale as a result of US-China tariffs. For the purposes of this investigation, I chose to focus more on trade redirection. This was not to say that trade fraud does not occur, but due to the limitations of my data, it is less suited to the investigation of trade fraud. When observing the change in trade flows between China, Asia, and the US, a significant discrepancy between the increase in flows of tariff goods as compared to non-tariff goods can be observed. For trade flows from China to Asia, there's a noticeable increase in the flow of tariff goods post 2017, while the flow of goods for non-tariff goods remains relatively the same. This is similar to the trade flow of Asia to the US, where there is a significant increase in the flow of tariff goods, while the flow of non-tariff goods remains relatively unchanged. This discrepancy can be explained in one of two ways. Firstly, by following normal economic theory. For China to Asia, Chinese exporters will divert a proportion of exports away from the US to other countries where they do not incur a tariff. For Asia to the US, Asian exporters will fill the gap in imports left by the diversion of trade away from the US by China. Secondly, and more interestingly, trade diversion. From China to Asia, Chinese exporters of tariff goods that are meant for the US will export goods to other countries, likely countries that have a convenient geographical location, countries close to China, i.e., Asia, or countries like Mexico. From Asia to the US, the goods exported to Asia are then re-exported to the US. From the US perspective, these goods are coming from Asia and therefore are not subject to tariffs. In this way, Chinese exporters are still able to export their goods to the US, albeit through another country. This will explain the rise in trade flow of tariff goods from China to Asia and subsequently Asia to the US. What does this mean for stakeholders? Third-party countries gained new businesses as middlemen, boosting shipping, assembly, and logistics as they experience increased trade flows through their economies. US producers gained some protection but also faced higher costs when inputs became more expensive. US consumers paid more but not as much as they predicted, since rerouting softened the blow, but still a higher cost due to inefficiencies and handling costs. Economically, this is a classic deadweight loss. Consumers lose welfare, producers only partially gain, and resources are wasted in detours rather than efficient production. So, what's the big lesson? Tariffs are like a boomerang. They're aimed at hurting one country, in this case China, but swing back, hitting US consumers and creating opportunities for unintended players. Short-term intermediaries like Vietnam and Malaysia benefited. Long-term US consumers face higher costs, inefficiencies, and even potential job losses in industries reliant on Chinese inputs. So from these findings, we can predict what will happen in Trump's second term in office. Well, as we know, the US imposed tariffs on a whole host of countries, which include countries like in Asia like Malaysia and Vietnam, and of course China. Given that the infrastructure for trade redirection has already been set up, we can expect that it will continue to prevail, especially if the tariff rate in third-party countries is lower than that of China. Furthermore, it is likely that the prevalence of trade fraud will rise due to the increased incentive to underreport customs values in order to pay less of the tariffs. In conclusion, tariffs may look like a straightforward tool of protectionism, but they often work more like pressure valves, redirecting trade rather than stopping it. The result is a reshaped global system with hidden costs that policymakers need to anticipate. Thank you for listening and for your time.